And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Well, welcome back. It's yet another edition of the Liberty Podcast. Today is 11 January 2024. It's a new year, I'm told, but with many of the issues that spilled over from last year still on our radar, and very much so, as they should be. Today, we're going to veer from our normal format where I do a lot of talking, and we are going to go via the miracle of video production to my exclusive interview with State Treasurer Dale Folwell, who is a candidate for governor of North Carolina in the primary in March, for which early voting begins, believe it or not, on February 15. That's like in 1 month. Mr. Folwell is a two-term treasurer. He is one of the most effective treasurers in the nation. He has restored the North Carolina books to full solvency. He has built one of the most robust state pension funds in the land. And he is arguably the most qualified candidate for governor, despite the celebrity status accorded his opponent, Lieutenant Gov. Mark Robinson. We talked with Treasurer Folwell earlier. Let's take a look. All right. Thank you very much for joining me today, Treasurer Folwell.
Well, thank you for having me. Good morning, and good morning to all of your podcasters and listeners in Moore County.
Well, I hope that they are growing in numbers by the week. That is the goal. And but more importantly, you're out there collecting votes, and that's what really matters, and that's why you're here today. Please tell us how you plan to complete the final stretch of your campaign. What is your strategy and overall strategy to win the primary?
The overall strategy continues to be to talk to people like adults, and what they hear makes common sense. I think the Republican Party is in peril. We are not the number one or the number two party in the state. We're the number three party. And people can be comforted by supermajorities in the House and the Senate, the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court. But the fact is that we've only elected 3 governors in the last 30 years. And as the first Republican state treasurer since President Ulysses S. Grant, I'm uniquely qualified not only to govern, and the root word of governor is to govern, it's a verb. The root word of conservative is to conserve, it's also a verb. The root word of liberal is to liberate. To put people in a position to set them economically free so they have a joy of achievement and upward mobility in their life. I was honored this week to receive the endorsement of the State Employees Association, and them and other groups. They know my work as the keeper of their public purse. They know that at every turn, I've always underpromised and over-delivered in terms of the things that are important to them, which is the safety and security of their pension and their health care benefits. And they also know that in the 2016 and the 2020 election, I was the first Republican they ever endorsed for governor. No, for treasurer. I am now the first Republican they've ever endorsed for governor. And the reason that is that they know that in the last 2 presidential elections, that I'm the only Republican to ever receive every newspaper endorsement, including the black newspapers like the Winston-Salem Chronicle and the Charlotte Post, but also the State Employees Association endorsement. More votes than Donald Trump did twice on the same ballot, and over 500,000 votes more than Josh Stein did, running against different people, but also on the same ballot. So it doesn't matter if you turn your spigot off when you brush your teeth, turn your thermostat down when you go to work, Steve, or cut that toothpaste in two to get that last little drop out, or when that bar of soap gets thin, you put that thin bar of soap on top of the new bar of soap so that you can keep using it. Every single person in this state is conservative in some way, shape, or form. And it's our responsibility to explain conservatism without offending people, to be the party of hope, not hate, courage, not rage, even though the word rage is inside the word courage. And that's what I have done as a public servant, and that's what I will do as the next governor of North Carolina. And I think at the end of the day, when people get serious about their vote 54 days from now, they're going to realize that they want to hand the keys to someone who has actually governed, where there's no gaps between their individual life and their individual finances, their campaign life, their campaign finances, and their public service life and their public service finances. There are no gaps in any of those with me. And I think that is the key to success.
You mentioned being conservative, and very often the left and the media characterize conservatism not from a fiscal point of view, not from a tax policy point of view, a spending point of view. It's always about social issues. It's always about the conservatives are not for reproductive rights. The conservatives want to overwhelm the public education system with religion and prayer. How do you feel about that, given the fact that we have been governed so-called by Roy Cooper the last nearly 8 years, by someone who repeatedly vetoes all kinds of legislation to enforce reasonable abortion policies, to try to control this transgenderism that is sweeping our culture? Where do you come down on those conservative values?
Well, that's a great question. And as I said, conservative is what you do, not what you say that you're going to do. Unlike the presumptive front runner in the governor's race in the Republican primary, who has been for things and then he's against them, then he's against things that he's now for. The fact is that as a public servant who has spent my entire career saving lives, saving minds, and saving money, that is what conservatives should be focused on: saving lives, saving minds, and saving money. In terms of the governor and these issues that you refer to, the problem with our party is we have counterfeit conservatives. We have people who call themselves conservatives who do not conserve anything in their personal, their campaign, or their public service life. And I have received every award, I believe, that's ever been offered by conservative organizations across North Carolina over the last 16 years. And that's from Family Values Coalition. I just was honored to receive the Jonas Award for public service from the Republican Party, the Jesse Helms Award, the Broyden Award, the Holzhauser Award. So many awards that I have gotten, not because of what I've said and not because I yell at people, but because I'm able to explain conservatism without offending. In terms of the transgender issues, you may know that I am a defendant in federal court because I am on a court order. I am being compelled as the state treasurer of North Carolina to pay for sex transition operations with taxpayer money. The Attorney General who chose, I didn't know he had a choice on who he represented. He chose to represent the UNC system, but not the Treasurer's office. And so we now have outside counsel where this is currently in the Fourth Circuit. And the reason this should matter to you is that as the chair of the State Health Plan Board, our responsibility is to do the most good for the most number of people because the State Health Plan is basically insolvent. Well, sex transition operations does not fall under the definition of doing the most good for the most number of people. I'll not even talk about the science of this and whether this is a medical necessity, which is what they're trying to force me to accept. So my point of saying that to you is that I think, as I said earlier, that common sense is not so common anymore. And I think your podcasters are pretty exhausted. Those that are my age, I'm 65, they don't even recognize the Republican Party anymore. If you look at the plan of organization and the Constitution, we're talking about things we never thought we would talk about, like casinos to fund the important, needs of our state. The young people don't even know what Republicans are or what they stand for at all. And that's the reason that the majority of people in this state do not have a name on the back of their jersey. And that is the direct blame. I'm blaming the counterfeit conservatives who call themselves one thing, and then when they get to Washington, D.C. and Raleigh, they do something differently.
You mentioned, by the way, you said you're 65, so that means you've still got 15 years before you're old enough to run for president of the United States, but that's another topic. You mentioned casinos, and I know a lot of my fellow conservatives were beside themselves, really dismayed by Senator Berger's pursuit of this casino expansion, as he calls it, which would not just include casinos as we think of them, but also all kinds of, drive-through one-armed bandits at gas stations and whatnot. Why in the world should any Republican desire to see casinos become part of the culture of North Carolina?
It's about the money. And the amount of consultants and lobbyists who are making tens and tens of thousands of dollars a month on the contracts to get casinos passed. That's what it's about. It's not about the people of North Carolina. You mentioned President Biden earlier, and I will say this. My opponent President Joe Biden has more energy and is more accessible than my opponent is to be the governor of North Carolina. And that's not saying much, is it? The presumptive front runner in this race is not accessible, will not debate, will not actually answer the tough questions. So my point of bringing this in is that we have to have real conservatives, not counterfeit conservatives, who did hold up a state budget for nearly 4 months. Now, you imagine as the state treasurer of North Carolina, when the rating agencies are calling me and saying, why don't y'all have a budget passed? Well, because there's a battle over casinos. That is why the budget was held up. Obviously, we have retired 60% of the state debt over 8 years. So I'm always interested in what the rating agencies say, unless it's about ESG, which I fault. But I'm always interested in what they say. But the fact is, when they call and say, are you serious that your budget's being held up over policy debate about casinos? And I have to answer that question honestly. I am the only candidate running for governor who has come out against the casinos. I'm the only candidate running for governor who consistently, as a legislator, voted against sweepstakes. I'm the only candidate running for governor who voted against the lottery. Conservatism is not what you say, it's what you do.
I wish that were the case across the board. That is for sure. You mentioned.
See, they can't be across the board. The Republican governor, will be the leader of the Republican Party and will set the tone and should be asking questions on behalf of the grassroots. The grassroots are exhausted. I've never seen the Republican Party as split as it is across North Carolina because we have elected officials who do not follow the plan of organization and do not follow the North Carolina Constitution.
Correct. I want to ask you a question about the last roughly 3.5 years, during which not only the state of North Carolina, but the entire world was swept into this unforeseeable pandemic that we have now come out of. Of course, the issue with the pandemic was that it was immediately leveraged by the left as a power grab without regard for the seriousness of it on an individual basis, and nobody knows that better than you. However, none of us would ever want to live through what we did again under Governor Cooper, in terms of businesses being closed, livelihoods being up for grabs, people being forced to choose between a non-FDA approved experimental serum and keeping their jobs, children being denied access to schools, citizens being denied access to worship in their churches while bars and health clubs remained open. In retrospect, and if you had been governor during this period, how would you have dealt with this crisis? It was a health crisis. There's no question about that. But the real crisis was the way that it was leveraged and hijacked by the left, because we saw the clear contrast between states like Florida and Texas and how they dealt with it versus North Carolina and other states with tyrannical Democrat governors. What would you have done?
Number one, as a Quaker, we believe when we talk to people, we sit around the table in circles. The table that the people of North Carolina, this conversation that they expected to happen was around the circle of the Council of State. Never did the governor ask, how is this going to impact our agricultural industry? And by the way, we, I think, killed 1 million piglets, 1 million small turkeys, and 1 million chickens during COVID because at a snap of a finger, when half the food was going to restaurants and half the food was going to grocery stores, all that had to flip from a distribution standpoint. The Council of State, he would not convene the Council of State. And when he wanted political cover on things, he asked for our vote. And when he knew he not have the votes, and the Republicans control the Council of State. We have 6 votes on the Council of State. When he didn't think he had the votes, he did it through executive order, through Mandy Cohen. Now, a lot of people have criticized me, but I said it earlier middle last year. When Mandy Cohen was being considered as the head of the national CDC, I said, in my opinion, I don't know of any one individual in our state who's been responsible for more disease, more death, more illiteracy, and more poverty than Mandy Cohen. It took us 5 months to get the Council of State to properly convene. And what really irritated the governor is when I said, if you can put 24 children on a school bus, why in the heck can you not put 10 of us in a 2,000 square foot room to discuss the important issues? Treasury, finance, public education, agriculture, and all the other members of the Council of State. I also want to tell you that, there's a lot of talk about North Carolina just jumping up on the table and being number 3 as far as school choice is concerned. It's funny how God made our hands, Steve. Anytime I point a finger at you, there are 3 more pointing back at me. There's no one more responsible for the sunshine that was put on what wasn't happening in public education than Governor Cooper. He has no one to blame than parents voting with their feet and leaving the public school system but himself. Because when he shut this economy down, he put the sunshine on what was not happening in public education. And that resulted in people voting with their feet. So, to directly answer your question, we will dutifully convene the Council of State. Number one, we will follow Robert's Rules of Orders. Number two, when people vote within the close of the business day, the citizens of this state, the conservatives of Moore County, will know how people that they elected in Central Raleigh voted on these important issues. God forbid this were to ever happen. And lastly, the other thing I caught much criticism for 2 years ago is this. I said the 16-year-olds at Chick-fil-A could have done a better job of distributing this vaccine than Mandy Cohen did. And the presumptive front runner in the governor's race, Mark Robinson, he will say that he's had COVID. But when people ask him, has he been vaccinated? He said, that's none of your business. So nothing is anybody's business. And that's where the counterfeit conservatism starts. As you know, my family was planning my funeral in March of 20. I had a blood oxygen level of 82. I was consuming 8 liters of oxygen in intensive care in March of 20. I'm not a doctor. My initials are DR Falwell. I'm one period away from being called a doctor. And by the way, the Robbins is J.C. Robbins from Poplar Street in Aberdeen, who ran the Aberdeen Hardware for 33 years.
Your middle name, Robbins.
Yes. So, but I know that when your blood oxygen is 82 and you're consuming 8 liters of oxygen, you're not long for this world in March of 20. I fought from being ventilated, which would have killed me. Mm-hmm. And my point of telling you that, and within 23 minutes of my wife dropping me off, and it's hard for a Falwell to say, take me to the hospital. That's a hard thing for a Falwell to do. But I was in the ER for 23 minutes, and they gave me hydrochloroquine and Z-Pak on the way up the elevator to intensive care. That probably saved my life. My direct answer to your question is this. Our Republican Party, the one I joined nearly 50 years ago, is based on conservatism, common sense, courtesy, humanity, humility, and ethics. And ethics is what you do when no one's watching, and what you do when the powerful people tell you to look the other way. And that's the reason I'm not endorsed by, I don't know why Senator Berger didn't endorse me. He knows my work, because I asked too many questions. He didn't want a governor that asked questions like about casinos. I was Speaker Pro Tem under Senator Tillis. My point of telling you this is this governor's race is being driven by consultants and money. And I have been the best treasurer money can't buy. I will be the best governor money can't buy. And more importantly, the people in Moore County, like I spoke to yesterday, I will be appearing as not just once every 4 years as their governor, but someone who's going to come back constantly and talk about what I have done with DOT, DMV, Board of Elections, DHHS. We're talking about COVID. All these other important functions of state government. I'll be reporting back to what I've done with the keys they've handed me to bring a conservative culture to these state agencies.
In the few minutes that we have remaining, when we monitor national elections like President of the United States or races for seats in Congress, we're constantly overwhelmed by polling. We're constantly being told where the races stand in terms of the polls. The man whose banner is behind me here obviously is constantly discussed in terms of how overwhelmingly he is leading the polls. He has also been a very visible fan, I guess you would say, of Mark Robinson. Mark Robinson was very quickly sort of waltzed into the rarefied air of celebrity because of people like Donald Trump. I only raise that to say what is your feeling about where this race stands, because we don't see polling every week on how is the governor's race going in North Carolina. I haven't seen a good poll in weeks or months. Where do you think you actually stand?
I don't I'm not leading the polls and I'm not leading the money. I could snap my fingers and be the leading money raiser in the governor's race by selling access to the treasurer's office. That is not what you expect from a real conservative who's the keeper of your public purse. It happens all across the state, number one. Number two, the polling reflects the fact that I'm doing my job. Mark Robinson is the most absent AWOL elected official of my lifetime. The Constitution, which should be important to your podcasters, the Constitution says the responsibility of the lieutenant governor is to preside over the Senate. He has been absent 92% of the time this year. I've never seen him at a community college board meeting. Missed over half the Board of Education meetings, which he says are so important. And we want to talk about his energy policy committee, and he wasn't even there when he submitted the report to the General Assembly. My point is that the polls reflect the fact that I am showing up for my job as the sole fiduciary of $248 billion. And I don't think that you can apply for another job if you don't prove that you're showing up for the job that the voters currently gave you. I don't think that Donald Trump really knows Mark Robinson. The other day, he could not even name where he gave a speech, what the speech was about, comparing him to Martin Luther King. He actually didn't endorse him, just said what a great speaker he was. If you actually go back and read the transcript, I'm sure that's coming at some point. But my point of telling you that is that my job is to get more votes than Donald Trump did, again, as I've done twice before. Number two, I just want to remind all of your podcasters that this is the last time in my lifetime to elect a Republican governor. I don't say that emotionally or politically, I say it mathematically. And if we elect the right Republican governor, we will have conservative Republican governors for the rest of my lifetime. But it requires somebody who will show up for work and where there's no gaps between their personal life, their campaign life, and their public service life. I'll also tell you that I don't think Donald Trump knows that Mark Robinson's a Holocaust denier. I don't think he knows that in his own book, he says women talk too much and should not be in a position of leadership. I don't think he knows that he puts on Facebook a question: if you beat the bird, dog, hell out of your wife at the mall, is that still domestic violence? Can you imagine anybody even thinking of those words and putting them in a sentence? The fact is that Mark Robinson is leading the polls because all he has done for 3 years is traveled around with highway patrol in a state vehicle using state gasoline and use campaign money to do all kinds of things, including buy his wife clothing, who, by the way, is getting $2 million a year from the state DHHS for her child nutrition nonprofit. So why should somebody who's making $180,000 a year be getting money out of Mark Robinson's campaign funds to buy her clothing?
All excellent questions. And I will say that as like many people who have gravitated to North Carolina, and I from the state of Illinois, I have great admiration for a treasurer who makes sure that North Carolina is one of only 13 states in the nation with a AAA credit rating that has one of probably the most robust pension system in America. Coming from a state like Illinois, I know how important those kinds of basic fundamental financial metrics really are, and I hope that more of our fellow North Carolinians come to understand that in the final days of this campaign. And before I let you go, please tell my audience how they can donate to your campaign. Where can they go? What should they do?
If they can mail a check to the Falwell Committee at 299 S. Westview Drive, that's Winston-Salem, 27104, or they can go online at dalefalwell.com. And I know we're getting ready to close, but I do want to say something about North Carolina's physical activity. It's a result of strategy and discipline. and asking tough questions. The reason the powerful people do not want me as the next governor is that they don't like the questions I ask. And these are questions that I ask on behalf of the grassroots of this state, the grassroots who put out the yard signs, hand out the leaflets, make the phone calls on behalf of people like me to put me in a position to be the first Republican state treasurer since President Ulysses S. Grant. So I said in my speech yesterday, I had a little mirror. I said, most elected officials turn the mirror toward themselves after they get elected. Every elected official, especially the governor, who is going to have to defend this state from Washington, D.C.'s addiction for money, because it's no longer the state of the union. It's going to be states of the union that save this country. And I was honored 6 weeks ago to be highlighted by Governing Magazine as one of 3 Americans who can actually govern like an adult. Kim Reynolds from Iowa, the governor of Tennessee, and myself. That is what people want, and that's how we're going to win. And if you vote for me, that means you're tired of losing the governor's race.
Well, we're tired of a lot of things. And Treasurer Falwell, I thank you very much for joining us today. And we wish you not luck, but success on the campaign trail in the final days. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. God bless.